Test, test, test.
السيدات والسادة، ستبدأ الجلسة التالية بعد قليل. Ladies and gentlemen, the session is about to start. Thank you.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. And it is my great pleasure to convene this first session in this hall today, and in so doing, unofficially commence the second UN World Data Forum. We have with us an amazing cross-section of expertise this morning from around the world to discuss new approaches to data governance in the 21st century. The rationale for this session is simple. Data governance is a rapidly evolving concept. It means different things to different people and different organizations. The broader data landscape continues to evolve, and we may find ourselves struggling to catch up. This session has brought together representatives from across government, multilaterals organizations, non-government organizations, and funders to discuss their own experiences and insights into effective data governance processes and share key lessons with you this morning. Today's discussion will begin momentarily with brief presentations from each of our speakers to share an overview of what they mean by data governance and how they're doing it. We'll then commence with the discussion, and then we'll move on to Q&A from our audience this morning. It's the Q&A which will have a workshop function. We'll encourage you to pose questions about data governance processes you yourselves may be undertaking, and then ask our panel of experts for their advice. Since these sessions are back-to-back, we may have a moment where one or more of our session panelists may have to excuse themselves to move on to the next session, but we'll continue the Q&A in a timely fashion. So, without further ado, it is my great pleasure to begin by introducing our panelists, and then we'll move on to our presentations. We have with us Ms. Fetsimone Sohn.
Yes.
Fetsimone is Deputy Head of the Lao Statistics Bureau with the Ministry of Planning and Investment. Her fields of expertise include the Lao National Statistics System organization itself, its legal structure, statistical strategies and programs. She has in particular led the preparation of the first and second National Statistics Development Strategy for 2010 and 20, including its midterm review with Paris 21. We have Mr. Gopi Krishna Kanal. He's a Joint Secretary at the National Natural Resource and Fiscal Commission in Nepal. He and his team advise government on revenue distribution to the local levels and provinces across the country. He was previously with the Ministry of Industry, the Ministry of Federal Affairs and Local Development. We have Mr. Jake Porway. Jake is founder and executive director of DataKind. His career spans more than 10 years in the data science sector as a statistician and computer scientist. He's worked as a data scientist for the New York Times R&D lab. He's been a research scientist studying machine learning and probabilistic modeling tasks with NASA, and he's worked with the Office of Naval Research, among other government agencies. We have Dr. Haishan Fu. Dr. Fu is director of the World Bank's Development Data Group. She's been an active leader in the global statistical community. She's served as a member of the UN Secretary General's Independent Expert Advisory Group on the Data Revolution for Sustainable Development. She's a council member of the International Statistics Institute and co-chair of the Global Steering Committee of the Global Strategy to Improve Agriculture and Rural Statistics. Among others, she is also the co-chair of the Development Data Council at the World Bank. And we have Mr. Fernando Perini. Fernando is a senior program officer at Canada's International Development Research Centre, the IDRC, where he coordinates the Open Data for Development program, the OD4D. Fernando likewise has extensive international experience as a researcher, consultant, and lecturer. Most recently, he was co-organizer of the International Open Data Conference, which gathered 2,000 participants from across 85 countries to examine the global impact of open data, coordinate action, and share best practices. Ladies and gentlemen, our panel this morning. So we'll begin, as I mentioned, with a brief overview from each panelist about what data governance is and how they do it. Fetsimone.
Yeah. Good morning. Thank you very much. Let me begin with the discussions where the small country Lao Statistics Office starts to take off.
If you press.
Sorry.
One more time. Let's try it.
Hold on.
And there you are, and there you are,
Next.
and there you are.
Which one?
The big one, exactly.
The strategy for the development of national statistical system and the national statistical law is provide the legal framework and strategy for us to develop our institutional capacity. And with that, with the TA of the Lao State projects to strengthening the Lao national statistics system, come with the support from the World Bank. Recently, this project is period for 4 years, and through the twinning arrangement, it provides us a basic to lead to the developed data governance framework. And if you can see, we start with our people. We prepare a series of documents which endorsed by our ministries. And regarding to the process, I think we focus on the HR development where we could strengthening our people capacity, where we have this HR development and training capacity planned. And regarding to the process, of course, we focus on the development of quality measurement production process, and we would like to follow this GSBPM, and also focus on specific subjects like national accounts or household survey. And with this, cannot be said without the increasing effectiveness that is technology. For the technology, we also prepare our ICT work plan, which will help us to enabling our ICT environment and also increase our infrastructure to support the statistical system and to operate. And all of this will help us to stimulate our data disseminations. With this, I think the reason I'm here today with the panel is not just sharing our best practice, but to really share our challenge and issues that we would like to focus on the next 5 and 10 years to respond to this SDG agenda, to increase our official statistic quality and timeliness and comprehensiveness and comparability at the end. With that perspective, I think we made also some progress, but there are many challenges remain to translate into projects and to program for further development. With that, I would think that this challenge will meet only with the government support and also the international development partners' support will be needed in the years to come to implement and to focus on this implementation of data dissemination plans, to implement these ICT infrastructures, environment, and the plan. And also, we would like to focus on our implementation of a quality assurance framework. At the end, we would like to build the capacity of our organization. With this, I would like to end my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Fred Simon. Gopi, would you mind? Here we are. Thanks so much.
Good morning and namaskar. I'm Gopi Khanal, Joint Secretary. I work in National Natural Resource and Fiscal Commission in Nepal. I have given 5 minutes only, so I will try my best to confine within the time and present what we are doing for the data governance, basically with particular focus on my offices. So this, as I said, I work for the National Natural Resource and Fiscal Commission. We work for data. This is a very new constitutional body. We work for fiscal federalism in Nepal. And basically, we are responsible for the equitable distribution of fiscal and natural resources among different tiers of the government. So, so in that sense, the data is very, very crucial for the allocation of all the fiscal resources. We also work for intergovernmental disputes on the fiscal relationship. We recommend different criteria based on the data of the transfer to sub-national government. We are also responsible for the providing debt ceiling to all tiers of government. We have 3 tiers of government: national government, provincial government. We are a new federation. So at the national level, we have the Central Bureau of Statistics. That's a national government organization responsible for the census data and our periodic and sectoral data. We have 753 local governments across the country. They are also very responsible for the compiling and analyzing the local data. And different sector ministry, they are also responsible for the data system. Many different ministries have started a management information system for evidence-based decision making. So Ministry of Finance has introduced this line ministry budget information systems. It operated by Ministry of Finance in Nepal. So one question is why we need data, particularly in fiscal federalism. We need data on natural resources. We need data on the cost of the services. We need data on the internal borrowing of different agencies. We need data on the fiscal transport. We need data on the socio-economic status So we need a variety of data in our office. So basically, population census is the main source of data in Nepal. There are also economic census. There are periodic national living standards surveys supported by international agencies like World Bank often. So there are often local level survey at the local level. Every Ministry of Finance every year, they publish economic survey and demographic and other socioeconomic data. So the main challenge of data governance in my country is how to update the data. Data every month, every day, the data changes. How we can update that, or how we can bring new technology for the updating data. So how we can start automation in the data governance, basically using information technology. And there are so many new development in the data science. How we can build the capacity of different government agency on updating, compiling, analyzing the data. That's also the challenges. So data. There are different stakeholders in the data. How we can coordinate all these other challenges. Basically, what lessons we have learned is that institutionalizing the data science for the evidence-based policy making is very, very important. More the decisions are based on evidence and facts and data supported by data, and more the decisions and policy making is effective. So how we can build the capacity of different agencies so that's building capacity of the different agencies using modern technology. That is also one lesson we have learned. So open data, so we are the democratic society, how we can make our data system more transparent so every citizens know, because they have the stakes on the governance. So we need data for development decision makings as well as performance evaluation for the different agencies of the government. Sometimes we need data for the day-to-day operation, functional things. Sometimes we need data for the study. I think what we have learned that we need data for both for the functional level as well as strategy level. So these are the lessons what we have learned. So with this, thank you.
Thank you very much. Jake.
Thank you so much. And good morning, everyone. Good to see you all. So my name is Jake, and I'm the director at an NGO called DataKind. And we're a nonprofit that's dedicated to using data science and AI in the service of humanity. And the way that we work is we get experts from industry and tech companies to work alongside humanitarian causes for free. We think a lot of the challenges people face today is that they have lots of data, but they don't often have all the capacity to work with it. So we try to solve that by building teams of folks across our network around the world to work alongside groups like the Red Cross or Amnesty International. And we have a global network that works, done over 300 projects. There are about 18,000 people doing these volunteer activities around the world. And so I don't want to talk so much about specific data governance techniques as much as to just give a flavor of some of the places we run up against data governance, because I think one of the perspectives we can offer is having seen a lot of different organizations' data governance structures. So just very quickly, if you think of DataKind as a big volunteer matching platform, we touch data in three places. So one is with DataKind and our partners. Every group we work with, we have to negotiate using their data, whether that's a government or a nonprofit or a corporation. And so we work with them to set up data sharing agreements and data licensing, fairly standard practice. We need to make sure that we're storing that data correctly, we're entrusted with their data, and that anything the volunteers work on is going to be safe and properly stored. So that's pretty standard data sharing work that we do there. The second source of data, of course, is our own data about our projects and our volunteers. That's a little less sensitive, but of course we have to be careful when we're running a global network about not sharing personal information or using it incorrectly. So we did implement GDPR, our DataKind UK branch did, And so we're trying to be very sensitive to how we're using personal information for our own analysis. But what I think is really more interesting is we see a lot of cases where we work with multiple actors inside the same SDG. So for example, we've worked with multiple organizations dedicated to improving maternal health ministries of health, nonprofits working in country to actually work with community health workers. And what's interesting is we, of course, get the privilege of working with each of their data sets individually. However, of course, as the kind of back end to that, we can see opportunities for that data to perhaps cut across the sector. For example, we may notice that one community health worker nonprofit has a huge amount of data that could be beneficial to a Ministry of Health that only has national statistics. Perhaps their data on the ground could help out there. However, we don't have a mechanism right now really for doing this well, for saying, hey, nonprofit on the ground, there's a government here, and perhaps together you two could set up new data structures or could share data. It's just something that we've observed as a big opportunity. We do have a kind of data persistence agreement with our partners, where they say what we're allowed to do with it after the project. So some would say, yes, open my data and make it free to everyone else, but that's pretty rare. It's more likely that we'll stop being able to use the data after the project. But I think there's something really powerful there. And I think there's a missing link somewhere in this sector for creating some data governance that actually allows organizations to cross that boundary and share that data. So I won't go into deep detail because I'm sure the rest of the panel discussion will talk more about the ins and outs of governance. But those are the three ways that we have been privileged to see others' information, through individual projects with partners, through our own data about projects, and through sector-level data that we now see in a pool. And so that's how we hope to contribute to the conversation.
Thanks, Jake.
The big green one.
This one?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Good morning. It's really wonderful to join all of you. It's only the first session, and so many parallel sessions are going on, but we have so many of you here. Really shows that we really share this understanding of how important this topic is. So I will start very quickly to mention that, at the World Bank, my colleagues like to say we do data from farm to table, meaning that we're really working not only to support countries with not only financing, but also technical advice to support their strengthening capacity to produce and disseminate and use data. But we also produce global public goods through the kind of data we compile, we share with the whole world in order to strengthen the impact of data that use for development. And at the same time that we also are continuing to learn in this time of age how we really can, together with every new partners and exploring new data sources to see how we can leverage digital disruptive technology to transform the conventional kind of data business that we're all familiar with, but also to find new ways of generating actionable data to provide real guidance to development actions. At the bank, so many of us are involved in this whole value chain. That raises this real need for us internally to introduce a new governance arrangement so that we can, across the bank, not only to come together based on the organization's technical capacity to understand what we should be prioritizing and focusing on in working with our clients, but also to influence our senior management decision making. That's why that we introduced about 4 years ago, I'm not sure it's going backwards, a Development Data Council arrangement precisely for us to try to understand how the world in terms of data landscape is changing, how our approaches to support our country clients should be indeed evolving, and how ourselves should learn to use new techniques and leverage new data sources in order to increase the impact of the kind of data product and services that we share with the world. So while we are looking not internally how we can improve how we do our business and reduce inefficiencies, we are grappling with all of the rest of the world in terms of the data challenges, especially when it comes to data governance. We know now there's so many new players, data players, from private sector to NGOs, in addition to the government statistical systems. We also know there's so many new data sources that generated not just by government data system, but also by private sector's business processes. We all know now data are considered currency on the internet, and so that there are whole host of issues that how we can really push for a paradigm shift in how data are governed. So there are quite a few opportunities and challenges, and there are a lot of uncertainties as we're all learning about how we can really adapt to this evolving data ecosystems. But I believe there's some core principles will continue to be the foundation to guide us in this process. So here I just want to mention 3 of them and see how our conversation could help advance our thinking and help us to design the practical approaches. First of all, there's the issue of data ownership, data privacies, and ethical use of data of different forms. And here I think the real challenge in terms of governance is that how we balance the need to protect human rights, privacies, at the same time to provide the enabling conditions to allow us to share and use different kinds of data in the best way possible for development outcomes. And here I'm really very happy to say that the UN Global Big Data Working Group has developed a set of principles to guide this in terms of how we can really engage with private sector and leverage private data sources. And also I'm glad to see the UN's Commission has initiated another round of effort to review the fundamental principles of official statistics to broaden, not only to uphold the fundamental principles in the way that we believe they are, but also to expand it to include openness of data, but also in terms of how we can leverage other alternative data sources. So those are all very important step forward, but I think it's very, very important that we proactively engage with the private sectors to further explore some of the issues that we are seeing around the world today, how the data that generated by private sector in internet data forms and social medias could be protected but shared ethically and responsibly for broader use. Second, I think it's very, very important while we're considering how to define the new data governance arrangement. We need to recognize the world is changing so fast. There's a real need for collaborative data science tools and techniques to be not only developed but shared. So we really need to create a culture of sharing such knowledge. It's not just about sharing data, but also sharing the kind of innovative but also responsible algorithms and tools so that we can collectively explore what's the best way to construct and to analyze and provide a kind of quality review necessary and also to ensure the best use of those data. And thirdly, actually talking about this sharing knowledge, I should use the opportunity to mention at the World Bank, we have recently introduced a data collaborative initiative. It's really about how we begin to establish systematically the kind of collaborative relationship with private sectors, not only to introduce what would be the legal agreement we should have between us, but also what are the technical requirements for us to access their data and explore the best analytics possible to help inform the kind of operational decisions that would really benefit our clients. And we also introduced a new publication. That's the first ever publication in the World Bank, which is the Sdg Atlas. It's the first time that all the data visualizations in the report that highlight the progress and challenge in each of the 17 SDG goals and targets. The data are open, and also the codes are open. So we're really moving towards open data, open code, and open knowledge in order to foster this culture. So the third point I want to stress is really technology is the driving force behind what we're doing. Therefore, we need to really be very proactive and innovative, but also based on our collective effort to define some essential features for the technological platforms so that we can ensure that there are interoperability built in from the very start of the data value chain in order for us to be able to use new disruptive technologies, be it AI, be it machine learning, in order for us to have this integrated data be used to generate real insight for our work. Just as we speak, there's another session going on. It's really a collaborative work between UN and the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. They developed and is launching the first set of guidelines for interoperability. I think that is really a very important progress, and I really want to acknowledge that. Because it's really, when we talk about new data governance arrangement in this new time, we need to look at not only the fundamental issues regarding ownership and privacy and ethical use, but also to provide the technical solutions for us to be able to leverage, to work with the new data players, but also leverage the different data sources. So with that, I'll move on to you.
Perfect. Okay. First of all, it's really an honor to be here, and thank you, Craig, for the invitation. Thank you to the bank, and thank you for the distinguished panelists, and thank you for joining us in this conversation. Well, my name is Fernando Perini. I work for the International Development Research Center, which is a Crown corporation. It's basically a part of international development in Canada, and we support a very specific type of development that's focused on building research to build the kind of innovations, knowledge in developing countries to create solutions for their own technological and development problems and socioeconomic problems in general. In specific, the area that I work on is called network economies, and we focus on the digital dimensions of that development. We have been working for more than 25 years at least on digital and how digital is changing the developing world. And very specific in relation to data, we have been working since at least 2010 in very specific programs that are doing research on kind of how this data society is changing across the world. So I mentioned just here a few of the programs that we have been working on. There's about, I'm not going to summarize them, but basically all of them tends to focus on developing good practices, understanding kind of building capacity of organizations and leaders in developing countries, creating global networks on kind of sharing those good practices, understanding the impact and how to move the agenda forward. We kind of, in our big data for development network, we have been focusing very much on kind of the use of data from the private sector on development, and particularly on the SDGs and measurement, but also in many different issues. In our work on CRVS, we have been working in strengthening the CRVS systems together with the bank in a number of occasions as well, to kind of how to understand best practice for improving the civil registration and vital statistics in developing countries. In our open data for development work, also something that we work very closely with the bank for many years. We have a global network of more than support more than 80 organizations working on kind of how to build openness, no, and creating and strengthen the open data ecosystems with this element of openness attached to that. But we also have worked in parallel with things like with Privacy International, for instance, on data protection around the world. No, kind of how and many countries have been revisiting data protection. There's actually a related network with that we call Stewards that actually focus on kind of when there are really breaches on data, on the personal data as well, kind of how can we be kind of stewards of the data in this increasingly interconnected, cyber-connected world that we live in. Also, so I think that the way we have been kind of, I'm not going to summarize here, obviously, but we have been working in all these things relatively in silos until now, actually. And I guess we develop a significant body of understanding of the different works in these different areas, these different data communities. But I think what we kind of feel from the events from the last year, and I think the global mood, is that we cannot really think of these things in isolation anymore. We cannot really think about kind of all these elements of the data world like as they all have been evolved as different data communities, as different elements of the ecosystem, but I think that we need a more holistic approach to data governance across these different areas, no? Recently, we hosted the International Open Data Conference in Buenos Aires, and we brought together not just open data folks. We wanted to bring together the main experts on kind of people that were working on data protection, on big data, on AI ethics, kind of just to start to understand where are the real links between all these different elements and how we can approach that. Okay? And it was a very rich conversation and something that we start to discuss a bit of. And I just want to point some ideas here because it might be helpful for us for our discussion. Here's a kind of one idea that comes in to kind of build a kind of a rights-based framework for data governance, kind of try to understand some imbalances that we have. And I think that this is an important issue. For me, governance is about trying to understand power dimensions, decisions, power, and try to bring balance into things. No, it's kind of, and you cannot go to the extremes. It really is about kind of governing this data society that we are having, no? So here we try to discuss some kind of just some things around kind of the distinctions between kind of data poor societies where kind of there's not enough data and data rich societies, no? And there's very different dimensions into that. And this is not a distinction between developed and developing countries anymore, by no means. There's very rich kind of data in many places around the developing world and poor quality data in some developed countries as well, no? So kind of, but there are specific communities, our society is different in many ways, and there are different dimensions that we need to talk about there. And we try to discuss a bit of this idea of the data powerful and the data powerless, no? And how we can address kind of the power imbalances in this governance. Who has power to do things, no? And we've seen like in kind of, for instance, just to give a few examples of this idea, kind of we've seen in kind of abuses in many cases of the data, the people that even in poor societies, that governments use their capacity to just to go against journalists or kind of use telecommunication networks to kind of get the data, get kind of trickle down the information and kind of really kind of use authoritarian regimes to kind of use unethically the power that they have in terms of their data, in terms of profiling people or and so on. In rich societies, we have seen more and more like people using their capacity to understand the data to kind of even structure information in different ways that creates kind of bias, no? In elections and so on. These all become part of kind of our data ecosystem. We cannot think about data governance without thinking about these issues. And of course, we need to kind of, these are kind of maybe some of the kind of, we also obviously need to think how in this governance framework we can build kind of power among the powerless, no? Basically, we kind of, the governance needs to bring them up. In data poor societies is a lot about including them into the data because having them into the data is about also thinking about policies for them, et cetera, and that's a lot of what brings us here to the UN Data Forum for sure in many of these aspects. But also, once they are into the data sets, we need to create infrastructures that kind of really make it like help us connect, kind of empower citizens that sometimes do not have power to really make governments accountable. And also, it's kind of try to build that that power into the citizens so that they can kind of participate in a data-rich society in a really strong voice. So I guess it's kind of we are just playing around. This is the first time that we present some of these ideas, I guess. But I think it's kind of, it comes from a real necessity to really work with other organizations to really kind of try to connect these umbrellas and really think about data governance as a kind of a framework that we kind of really start to work on these difficult questions that we have in our increasingly data-driven society everywhere. So I guess that's for my introduction. I'm looking forward for the discussions.
Thank you very much, Pat. Thank you very much, everyone, for your presentations. And I want to just begin before we commence our brief dialogue with our panelists and then move on to audience Q&A. To concede something, which is that this was a difficult panel to put together. As we're thinking about what data governance is and what counts as data governance, we had called some colleagues just to ask for their advice and thoughts about what the panel could look like and the kinds of topics of conversation we might have. And the reality is in discussing this with several counterparts, the first thing they said is, I don't want to be on this panel. And it's because many of our organizations, notwithstanding the size and scope and mandate of some of our organizations, be it government ministries or NSOs or multilaterals or NGOs or funders and philanthropies, a lot of these organizations don't have well-established or well-formed data governance priorities and practices. And it was not a priority for several colleagues and counterparts to stand up here and admit to that in a public room. So I want to thank our colleagues here for joining this panel, first of all, but also for giving us insight into how they've made decisions about what data governance is for them and how it's influencing their continuing prioritization processes. What I enjoyed hearing, I have to say, having this frame, to hear from Fred-Simone and Gopi about the nuts and bolts considerations with essentially superimposing data governance mechanisms and reconciling existing functions and data management on existing data management processes is quite something important. And we'll begin with Fred-Simone and Gopi. And it's just for the sake of colleagues in this room who might benefit from an understanding about how you started. Where does an NSO begin when it starts to prioritize its own data governance processes to try to rise to the level of its need? And where do you begin? Fred-Simone, let's begin with you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the questions to stimulate the discussions. I think in our case, this prioritization is really came in when the LSB have given the mandate to lead these SDGs compilations, and LSB is designated as a secretariat to National Steering Committee to respond to monitoring and evaluation of our national social economic development plan, and which is already committed and streamlined the SDG. With that, I think LSB has this opportunity and challenges in implementing this. And with this, I think we start with it's like any other good process in formulation of the plan. We start with our assessment and with a peer review, where we focus on the three key areas. That is the production process and also disseminations and the coordination, which is really bring the key user and the producer of the national official statistics system. And having said this, I would like to say that to govern the data, to have the common database is not a single product, but we really anticipate this is a kind of a full process that we have to generate. And like I said, we already start actually, like why we have on this strategic document, a master plan to support our strategy for national development statistical system from the year 2016-25. What we have to do now to implement our work plans.
So you began the process through an NSDS, or was it a parallel process?
I think NSDS start, and then we have this designation from the government, so we are doing a revision of our NSDS in parallel with the peer review.
So when you talk about assessment and peer review, what are even at a high level, some of the gaps or challenges. You had mentioned several in the implementation of the data governance approach that you've taken. But in the assessment itself, what were some of the challenge areas or gaps that you recognized needed to be reconciled?
Well, looking at the challenge, we're facing many challenges. I start with these HR challenges because we recently upgrade to be sub-ministries. Our staff is increased triple as good, but the capacity need to be in place, and a lot of investment in capacity development have to be catch up, and we have to, not just produce our national data, but also comply with international and best practice.
Thank you very much.
This is first challenge for HR, and other is also infrastructures, the network, the linkage between the government itself, I mean the statistic office, and also we have our system at the provincial and district. So this is also another challenges in terms of statistical infrastructures, including the ICT, and many other challenges. And we also still facing the limitations of budget and appropriate investment to the statistic development. Yeah.
Thank you. Gopi, it's the same question, and I note that you're also, your office is also responsible for reconciling the different levels of data governance at the provincial and district level as well. So how are you also approaching your own data governance approach? Where did you get started, and how is it going?
Thank you. Nepal is a very new federal country, and most of the data we have in the country is based on the unitary system. And now we have there are 7 provinces. There are many local government, and whatever the data we collected on the old, based on the old local government, and there are no any data. So the main challenges in our country is federalizing the data. I mean that developing the new data labels in the countries of federalism. So we have to compile all the data for 753 local government across the country, and based on the federal context. That's one thing. And in that context, so I think the first priority in our context, particularly in my office, because my office is responsible for the equitable distribution of fiscal natural resources. For that, we need a lot of huge quantity of the data. So how we can compile and use the data for the fiscal federalism, that's another priority area. And we have also adopted this sustainable development goal. So we have to compile and manage the data as per the SDG. That is also our priority area. Basically, there are some gaps also. I think basically, we need the appropriate level of the manpower. But basically, the data scientists at the all level of the governments. That's the way, and how we can build the capacity of the people, how we can develop the institution of the data governance from local to central. Mostly we focus on the central level government before, but how we can institutionalize the federal, provincial level government as well as local government. So these are the gaps I need to fulfill, I think.
It seems like there are some pervasive challenges associated with some of these initial processes. Jake, I am a big fan of DataKind, I should say. I think it is a force for good. And one of the questions I have for you as part of what you do with your clients is recognizing that several of us, again, maybe on the front end of data governance reform processes at the government level, but also amongst other organizational types. What are some of the pervasive challenges that you've noticed? I mean, we've heard about HR considerations, about infrastructure, about the importance of data integration processes. Are these common? Are there other challenges? And more importantly, what do you do about them? If you had to leave our audience with some key takeaways about some fixes that they themselves might consider as initial steps in some data governance reforms, what would that be?
It's a great question, and I'll say we have the privilege of being able to work alongside groups and learn about their processes without having to build any of them ourselves. So our friends from the NSO and governments have much more difficult jobs than I could ever give insight on. But I will say, I think one of the aspects that maybe hasn't been touched on yet that we see with a lot of our governmental partners or NGO partners is in terms of prioritizing how to do data governance, having some kind of feedback loops for the usage of that data. I think, again, our colleagues on the stage here have found lots of ways to use the data out in the world for communities. But speaking to some of the agencies that we've worked with, there's often a desire to, there's a focus on how to collect data about, say, national statistics and get it out to the public. But there's a little bit of a rift, certainly speaking about our own country in the US, about what data is useful and for what in the national priorities. Certainly other government agencies have demands for what they need, but we'll often see agencies create data or put out data because it's data that's possible to put out or because maybe someone has asked for it. But there's a divide between knowing what the applications are on the ground and who can actually use it. And so early on in the history of data.gov, which was the website that collected a lot of our national statistics and open data, I remember hearing there were rumors that they were going to have to shut it down because no one was really using it, because no one knew. The public wasn't sure what data to look for. They weren't sure how to use it. If you wanted to actually do any research with it, you had to be a researcher. And I think one of the innovations that we saw a lot of government agencies make that was really helpful was they started building partnerships out with research institutions, with NGOs in the community, and understanding what they needed. And if they had data scientists or some technical capacity, what we often saw was organizations could prototype solutions or try to build research and then come back to the government and say, we tried to predict more infant mortality rates from this data and we couldn't do it. But if we had this one piece of data, the model would work great. And at that point, the government agencies were able to say, well, we actually have that. We just never knew that was valuable, or we could find ways to collect it. And so it was we've seen some really successful cases of kind of shared data usage and application that become this feedback loop for the governments and the NSOs. It's not easily done. I think there's a whole question about who those partnerships should be with, how you form those. So I don't mean to imply that it's easy. But I just wanted to name, I think, some of the things we've seen our partners succeed most with is when they venture out to build those partnerships with technologists and nonprofits or others in the community, and then have some way to feed back to what data is being collected and how. Happy to expound on that if you want, but that's a high-level overarching idea, I'd say, is those partnerships have been really useful for some others.
It's a really important point, I think. So this idea of feedback loops, data for what, is an important theme, and I think we've also seen that in the multilateral context, Haishan. Can we talk about the origins of the bank's Development Data Council? I mean, it was constellated around this idea that there are certain gaps in development data, and you reverse engineered an entire governance process in order to try to fill those development data gaps in service of these goals that the institution has about eradicating extreme poverty and boosting shared prosperity for the bottom billion. Tell us about that process, about setting those goals and about creating the governance structure through the Development Data Council in service of those goals.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's incredible to join this panel because you hear not only what are the practical challenges in a national context is and how proactive you are by leveraging both the political commitment and also trying to boost the technical capacity to deal with that through improved governance arrangement to you, introducing a whole new right-based framework looking more globally above the governance challenges. So it's really incredible to then now for me to think back about in the World Bank how we have been trying to respond to the evolving change at country level and also globally and look at how we can do better. So indeed, about some years ago, when the bank just adopted the twin goals to eradicate extreme poverty and boost shared prosperity in a sustainable manner, we look at while we say there's a huge surge of the kind of data that generated across the world, both in private sector and in public sector, we're still lacking some of the fundamental data, even to allow us to look at how poverty has been changing. So that's one bank really decided that not only we will try to be much more proactive, we really need to take on develop data work as a core business. This really endorsed by the highest level governance, the Development Data Committee of the bank. And with that, the bank reaffirmed its commitment to scale up our support for national statistical systems and to, in order to make the best use of the data that exists through open data approach. And this is where bank realized that with a lot of the creative initiative going on, we don't have a central coordination body to help us to look at how we really prioritize and also allocate resources accordingly, and also organize our technical capacity internally to support this effort. That's when bank decided we really need to introduce a new data governance arrangement. And with the highest commitment from our senior management, we created a data council to organize at the management level how the senior leadership will be coming together from different segments of the bank to look at common data issues jointly and to prioritize and to influence both the technical work across the technical staff in the bank, but also to influence the financing for data. So what we have done is to really look at, first of all, along the data value chain, what we need to do to support countries to generate better data. So we developed a strategic actions program, starting with addressing the data gaps in the poverty area, but expanding from that to cover a broader range of data, from form-level data to household survey data to census data, and to how we can leverage big data and facilitate our bank's engagement with countries and also with private sector to look at some of the practical solutions. And under that prioritization and actions program, I'm so glad to see bank not only be able to leverage trust fund from donors, but also using that as a catalytics to broadening up banks' lending programs. So we see, for example, just in the household survey program itself, in the first year, we were able to channel $60 million to over 40 countries in Africa and in other regions to beef up the data collection for monitoring poverties through household surveys. But also, we now have more than 25 lending program in African countries to support the broader national statistical system development. At the same time, we also look at how we can make sure the data holdings with the World Bank, often hidden in different part of the bank, can become a shared asset, so that we developed a developed data hub in the bank to start with the documentation of those data, be it trend data, microdata, or geospatial data. Now we are also looking at how some of the private sector held data that can be shared through credible legal agreement that can be shared and documented. And we also ensure that it's not just about documenting data, but actually providing that platform, the technical solutions, in order for those data to be integrated whenever possible and necessary, so that that can be used to generate new data insight. So that's another area that we hope that by creating that internally, we will be able to share it with the world under credible, solid data sharing arrangement whenever it's possible to make them open. At the same time, as I mentioned earlier, the third component is to say to what extent the kind of public goods type of data, services, and product that we share with the world will go beyond just open data, that also include the reproducibility through sharing the code and the analytics, so that by doing so, we can really expand how banks support our clients, but also lead by example by really pushing the frontiers in this area. So I really have to say, with an internal governance arrangement put into place, we're able to better organize ourselves and prioritize ourselves and more systematically to scale up our effort along the different frontiers. But one real good lessons learned is that really bank is an important player in this time. Not only we have multiple stakeholders and data players around and the multiple type of data that we have to learn to use, we really also need to play our role to connect with each other and learn from each other and in order to really find the best data governance arrangement as well as technical solutions.
Thank you, Haishan. I know we're, I think, going to lose Jake, who must run to moderate the next session.
I have to run to another panel. Sorry to interrupt, and that I can't be more of the conversation, but this has been a pleasure. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Jake.
Have a good rest of the conversation.
And as Jake exits stage right, I think, so Haishan, it's interesting, I think, to think about some of the very kind of practical administrative considerations associated with boosting one's data governance approach. We've heard considerations from Fetsimone and Gopi about things like human resources and upskilling, as well as infrastructure needs, the need for kind of more meaningful integrating data sources from across different platforms and sources within an organization or government body in order to achieve some synergy and achieve new insights from the data holdings that you have. There's clearly IT considerations. It would be interesting maybe to take a higher level and Fernando, through the prism of the rights-based approach that you've presented to us, I suppose the question is, are there any kind of good practices or lingering questions in your mind? Are any emerging good practices that organizations should take home with them about improving their own data governance processes, and again, as a funder of research and data-driven initiatives, how do you prioritize that with your allocation of resources and the kinds of research that you're supporting?
Okay, great. I think as a funder, one of our jobs is really to support the communities in developing countries to rise, I guess. And one of the key, when we saw that kind of the data communities kind of becoming broader and broader over time, I think that kind of obviously the NSOs with a core mandate and a great important role on that, but also just referencing to the Mekong region has a emerging dynamic open data community as well that's kind of increasingly kind of having their own events, hacking to data, using this in different ways, creating new solutions for local problems. No organization can do it all, no? So we really need the kind of a broader, global, decentralized, dynamic community to think about those issues, no? Some of these communities have not been kind of had this right amount of synergies among the things, and then I think there's a lot to learn among these different communities. For instance, I think a successful case has been the kind of the work that we have been doing to connect the open data community with the statistical community in a number of ways. And I think that kind of the statistical community is much more embracing of open data just in kind of a couple of years, really, that kind of really thinking this through, kind of that's not kind of something that's separate, that's something that should be integrated to their practices. We saw the examples from Nepal and so on, kind of just talking about the kind of different issues that we kind of need to integrate into that conversation so they're not isolated. So I think that kind of, I think that's one thing that I think we kind of have had some success, and we need to continue to kind of build up on that. I think for the future, in terms of priority, I think that we kind of, more and more we need people that understand kind of course, you need to understand your niche and your capacity to contribute to the ecosystem, but also that you understand a more holistic picture of the data ecosystem that you are contributing to. And I think that kind of setting back and kind of learning and kind of engaging with the broader ecosystem, connecting bridging different communities, I think is kind of a key priority that we need to kind of move forward much stronger in the kind of coming years. I'm going to stop here so we can have some time also to get some questions from the audience.
Thank you very much, Fernando. So we have just a bit more than 10 minutes. We wanted to take several questions from the audience, perhaps. If you have, I believe we have runners with microphones on the side. And does anyone have a question that they'd like to pose to the audience? We have just here and then here. why don't we begin with these two questions? If we could take them both at the same time, and then here, sorry, and then we can turn to our panelists. Please, sir.
My name is Steffen Fritz. I'm working in an Austrian-based research center, and I'm working with Earth observation and citizen science. And I've heard very interesting dialogues here, talking about capacity building, talking about the use of big data, talking about data integration, and how people can learn to best use the data, making data useful, more useful. But one data stream and one piece which I feel is a little bit missing is the data generated by citizens themselves. And thinking seriously about a new data stream where citizens might contribute themselves in the data collection as such. And why not think about certain problems where citizens are also willing to contribute some of their own data, which will then in return help them again to improve development, for example. I don't know who wants to answer to this question, but thank you.
Shall we take the other two gentlemen's questions, and then we can come back to the panel, please? It's just here, please.
Hi, my name is Azam Nathaniel. I'm from Nepal. Haishan spoke about creating a culture of sharing data. Well, I would like to know, how do you create or strengthen the culture of using and sharing data, more specifically sharing data? And here are the things you've already done. You've already made your efforts. You've laid down these data sharing agreements. You've built the capacities at local government, institutional, and citizen level. And you've deployed the technology that is needed. You've deployed the technology solutions. And you're in the process of addressing the diversity in terms of the availability of various technologies in various regions of Nepal. In spite of all this, in spite of all these efforts, how do you create that very culture, that very mindset that Haishan specifically spoke about, where people hardly realize the power of data? So there's this huge lack of realization at local government and at the people level what data could do, what data could be used for. So what are your possible solutions for these things?
Thank you very much. And then I think a third question just here.
Thank you. My name is Mohammad Mustafizur Rahman. I am the Additional Secretary to the Government of Bangladesh, and now I am working as a Project Director of Access to Information Program. We have already built the Open Government Data Forum. Open Government Data, we have established one open portal to put the government data which has been opened. But due to the constraint of openness of the government agency, they are not willing to put their data very widely. So what strategy can we take, or is there any success story to make the government agencies openness? I want to know, I want to share. My question is to the Haishan Fu of the World Bank representatives. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your questions. So we've had a question on citizen-generated data, how we build a culture of shared data, and success cases for open data processes and reforms. Fernando, I believe you wanted to start possibly with the citizen-generated data, and then we'll come down.
Yeah, I'll start with the citizen-generated data. I'll talk about one of the cases that, and I talk about the importance of, sometimes I think one element that I want to bring to discussion is also about the trust, I guess, in some of these elements. And one case that we have been supporting for many years is an organization called Haras Map in Egypt and now internationally. They have done amazing work with citizen-generated data on kind of just cases of harassment and basically most of the sexual harassment, and basically most of the people that were affected, mostly women, but also many other citizens, kind of didn't feel that going to authorities or reporting that to governments would make a difference, and they wouldn't do it. So kind of organizations like that build on citizen-generated data, capture that, understand what's going on in the society, and then work with kind of directly with universities, with governments, with different kind of, they're now doing a great job together with Uber on kind of on fighting sexual harassment. So private sector as well. So kind of using those bridges, no, and citizen-generated data can have a tremendous impact in terms of really kind of promoting social change and so on. So I think that's just reinforcing that it's kind of clearly part of a data governance in our society that kind of, if you don't, that part that builds the trust and the data that comes direct from the citizens with the organizations that can handle this data. So I think that's super important and really appreciate bringing that to the conversation. I guess just I can just quickly, before passing to Haishan, the kind of, I understand that it's more on the cases of specific open data initiatives of successes, no? I think that kind of, if you're just talking, particularly to NSOs, I think there are a number of tools. I don't think that's particular to NSOs. It's broader, no? Well, but I guess there are a number of tools. I can mention a few that would be very useful to kind of identify good practices. Kind of, we work that we've done in the kind of the open data barometer kind of measures, kind of how governments have been doing across the world in 90 countries in relation to their open data initiatives, who are the top ranks, and kind of who are kind of a recent report came out a few weeks ago, I guess, on kind of, I think Canada and UK are kind of in the top on the open data initiatives at the moment, but kind of there's a lot of change in the top, so I think there's a lot of new rising of new groups, I think, or kind of, there are a number of new countries, especially developing countries, and regional leaders that are really showing a lot of new dynamism on the topic around the NSOs. I know that there is the open data inventory that really maps out a lot of this kind of how NSOs are doing in terms of disclosing kind of data, and I think that's a kind of important measurement, which also has developing countries leading different aspects. And there are many other kind of platforms that I can mention to kind of refer to kind of cases and so on. Who can check our website with reference with some of the initiatives. But I think the kind of key element that I think we need to explore is like as we think broader as well as the data governance. I think there still have a lot to understand kind of how these different dimensions can come together into kind of just going back to in a broader data governance system, no? And how all these different things are not necessarily all disconnected elements of the structure, that we kind of start building a more coherent narrative of how we can go and improve over time in these conversations. So I think that's still early stages on what we are talking about.
Thank you very much. I wonder if we might actually ask Fetsimone and Gopi about this idea of building a culture of shared data. As you are proceeding through the reforms that you're talking about, what does that process look like for your respective organizations?
Should I start first?
I couldn't follow.
The building a shared culture, a culture of a culture of shared data. The soft side of the data governance reform process.
I think, one of the fundamental tasks of the data governance 21st century is how we can institutionalize the open data governance at the foundation level, basically at the local level. So civic engagement in the data governance, I think, is very crucial because the data governance is, I think, a part of a democratic society. So by the data governance, if we can engage the people in the data governance, we can deepen the democracy. So in our country, local government are new. Local government are not new; they have been working since long time. But in the context of federalism, our new local government have new mandates. They have been restructured, and they are still working to create basic foundations in many areas, including the data. So. We need to, we are working for the participatory governance at the local level. So we have the Right to Information Act, and that is also one instrument from where people can get access to data. And many local governments in our countries have started, they have the website, they have mandatory provisions to publish their data. So it takes time, we can't, it takes time, but they are gradually working in that sense.
It's a process. So I think our time has concluded. So I want to thank our panelists very, very much. I would like to thank our audience for being intrepid enough to come out here a full 3.5 hours before the opening session of the second UN World Data Forum. Thank you all very much for your time, and we wish you an excellent, constructive, and happy forum. Thank you again very much.